Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is Robert Taylor, and his website is at www.robertvtaylor.com. And we're going to be discussing his book, A New Way to Be Human, 7 Spiritual Pathways to Becoming Fully Alive, that he's recently come out with. He's been doing spiritual work for decades now, and he's a much sought-after spiritual leader and a public speaker who invests his life in helping individuals and organizations realize their full human potential and impact in the world. And he's done a lot of work in this area, so I'm really thinking his book's going to be, well, actually, I read his book. It was really interesting, and I'm thinking that he's going to be a very interesting guest tonight as we talk to him about what got him interested in this and, how he, learned some of the information that he learned and where he's going with his book, etc. Now, for those of you that aren't listening right at my website or listening at YouTube or somewhere else like Shoutcast, if you want to call in, the number is 832-632-7904. If you want to attend these shows live and join everybody in chat and discuss with them, the website is www.paranormalpalace.com. Please come on over. We'll be more than pleased to have you. Always looking for more people in the chat room to, talk and keep the chat room going lively. And also people can ask the questions in chat if they don't like to call in. So, why don't we go ahead and get the show started and get Robert on here. Robert, how you doing tonight? I want to thank you for coming on the air with me.
I'm doing great, Royce. It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I think it's going to be wonderful that you come on with me. I mean, I've been looking forward to this here for some time. I know you and me had a couple cross paths there with life being what life usually is, and well, how life is. You just keep on stroking until you get it the way you want it.
Well, exactly, and here we are. So I'm glad to be with you.
Now, just to break the ice, why don't you tell everybody what kind of got you started into the area of being a, spiritual study? You're a priest of the Episcopalian Church, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes, I am, and even in that work, Royce, I found myself doing a great focus of my work over the decades has been working in the larger community on all kinds of social and interspiritual issues. And over the course of that time, I found myself doing more and more into spiritual work and learning from the practices of my Jewish and Buddhist and Hindu friends and others, and certainly from, those who say, gee, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So it's been a great journey, and I think one of the things that I've really learned within it all is, while I'm very clearly grounded in my tradition, I believe that the sacred is present in each and every human being, and that when we begin to open ourselves, our eyes and our hearts to that, our own practices and our own traditions, whatever they are, get enriched and enlarged and expanded, and we realize that there is wisdom and eternal truth found in every human being when we're able to connect on that spiritual level with one another.
Yeah, that was a recurring theme that I kept noticing in your book, that the more you actually socialize with people, the more you get to know people, the people that are pleasant, the people that are not pleasant. It all comes around to the same thing. In the process of getting to know, you get closer to what's holy in life.
Absolutely. And, I think it's sort of a natural sort of default position for many of us to just sort of hang out with the people we know best. And there's a good reason for that. We're comfortable with them. They know us. We know them. We can probably, finish each other's sentences or know what kind of jokes they're going to tell. And there's something wonderful about that. But there's also something really remarkable when we start to listen to the stories of people we don't know well, or perhaps even people who we've we've been told or were raised with. Our grandma might have said, boy, they're a little weird, or, I don't quite understand the funny clothes they wear, or, whatever it is. And you start to actually listen to people and do that with, paying some attention, and you find that if you actually know and you're comfortable with your own story and you're able to share it, that as you start talking, and you might do that, at work, or someone who's part of a sports club that you go to, or whatever it is, and you start to realize that there's common ground, and that the differences that you might have been led to have believed in are really not that great. But at the end of the day, we're all seeking happiness. We're looking to find our place in the world, how to make a difference. And when we start to connect with other people, we're really enriched by that experience, and we become more engaged. The world becomes a more interesting place. Life becomes enlivened and alive in some new ways.
Yeah, it's been my finding, too, that if you can... okay, now, Les was just saying in the chat room that the guest volume's a little low for him, that he has a noisy fan in the background, so he's having a little trouble hearing with his fan going. I'm going to see if I can raise the volume in the broadcaster form here a little bit and hope that does the trick.
Great.
I put it up all the way. I hope it don't bust anybody's eardrum. If this is too loud for anybody, turn your volume down, and we'll see how that works out. And Les, let me know if that fixed it for you after Robert speaks again, and then you can hear him and see if you can hear him any better. So, Robert, I understand that you were part of the segregation in Africa when you were younger. Do you think that had any influence on where you went later in life with spirituality?
Oh, I think it had a huge difference, Royce, and I tell a few stories about that in the book by way of really inviting the reader to think of their own experiences and what's formed and shaped them, because there are great learnings in it. I discovered some of the realities of, the old apartheid system in South Africa when I was a teenager back in the 70s. And, the whole system was designed so that people of the 4 different racial groups that were classified by the government would really never know one another as human beings, and that they would have limited contact. And I started to actually get to know and to meet black South Africans, and, I was this white teenage kid, and I was astounded by what I saw. I mean, I was horrified by the violence and the injustice of the system. But I think what really turned my heart and really sort of pointed my life in a certain direction was that my new friends were people who would always say, violence is not the way to change this. There's another way. We don't want to become like the people who are being violent towards us. And I thought, boy, is that kind of a wimpy approach, or is there something more at work here? And I discovered that that these were folks who refused to be told that they were not important, that their lives were insignificant, and their spirit was remarkable. And I think one of the lessons that I took away from that I've cherished for all of these decades is that no matter how people try to enclose us and wall us off from others, that we each have the power to make choices, and that's what my new friends were doing. They were saying, you can try to demean or diminish me or to write me off, but you know what? I am someone who reflects something of the sacred and the holy, and so you can't really do that. And there was laughter, there was gladness in their lives, and it was really remarkable to me. And so I think that those images have been very much a part of the journey that I've taken, and it's part of what the book, A New Way to Be Human, invites the reader into. The things that enclose us from ourselves, that keep us from our own magnificence, but also looking out for and looking beyond and stepping beyond those things that keep us from the magnificence of other people.
Right. And, sometimes it is very hard I found, well, me especially, I did collections for, goodness, 15 years for TV rental, and people would rent merchandise and move off. They would claim it was stolen when it wasn't, and, well, you didn't always get to see people at their very best, in other words, and for many years there, it would have been hard for me to look past that into the good, and it was that way really until I got out of it for a few years. So, yeah, I can kind of see how that can happen, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think, Royce, it's also, I mean, what you've just said is really important, because I think that that sometimes the work that we're in, or perhaps even, you know, our families or whatever, expose us just to the more shadowy side of life, and people who really not on the up and up. And yet, you know, the question then becomes, you know, as you discovered, so how do I put myself in situations where I'm experiencing something else about life?
Well, and, you know, I think for each person, Robert, that's probably, at least seems to me, and you know more about this than I do, would probably be different. I can tell you in my case it made a big difference when I moved into the neighborhood where these same people lived, and lived there for about 3 years, and actually became good friends with them over a period of time. But I'm pretty sure for each person it's probably pretty different, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, I do think, Royce, it is also about the way in which we choose to live each day. If I make choices that, you know, the world is just a really a gloomy place, and there's plenty of bad news out there in the world. I mean, we just need to, you know, open the newspaper or turn on TV or listen to the radio to hear it. It's easy to become sort of overwhelmed, but I think that there's something within each of us that our DNA is wired for goodness and for compassion, and that when we start to make choices to say, how do I want to approach each day? Am I going to see the negative, or am I going to acknowledge that the negative is there, but actually make choices to be with people who have life-giving energy, and who are alive with life. You know, I provide some tools in the book to readers about the situations that are toxic. You know, we've all been around in perhaps friendships or relationships with people who just suck the life out of a room or out of a situation, or who are actually quite toxic in the way they behave, and perhaps cast innuendo about people, or spend their lives disparaging. And so I provide some tools for actually detaching and saying, you know, I don't need to walk away in anger necessarily. I don't need to say something that's really perhaps offensive to this person about their bad behavior. But I can say, you know, I can hold you with the best of intentions, that you will know love and goodness in your lives, and I will continue to hold you in my intentions and prayers, but I need to actually detach from engaging with you. And when we start to do those things, we find that our energy becomes different, because we start to intentionally be open to and attracted to the people who have positive and life-giving energy.
Okay. Now, according to this book, your foreword was by Desmond Tutu, and when I was reading your book, I kind of got the idea that you two really kind of became more or less lifelong friends. I got the impression that he was like a major influence to you during your career in the religious and spiritual arena. Was that correct?
You know, he was just been a powerful force in my life, really since we started spending some time together in 1980. And in fact, in May of 2012, he joined me all the way from South Africa in Los Angeles for the Los Angeles launch of the book. And if any of your listeners are interested, they'll find video clips of that on my either on my website at robertvtaylor.com, or else on my YouTube channel, which is also Robert V. Taylor with the letter 1. He's just, you know, he's 80 years old. I am constantly struck by generous spirit, his loyalty as a friend, and I think what struck me about him when I first met him was his unrelenting belief in the notion that every single human being is loved and that every single human being reveals something of the beauty of the sacred, even if he or she doesn't know it, even if he or she has a life that really disguises all of that. And this wonderful thing that he keeps reminding people of, that they are loved. And with all of that is this very kind of mischievous, impish sense of humor. I mean, he's a guy who, he might have won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's an international figure, and I'm honored that he's written the foreword to the book, but he loves to play and to laugh and to simply be silly, because that's part of his grounding. And I think one of the things I learned from that early on was that, we often take life very seriously, and there's plenty in life to be serious about. I'm not suggesting that that's not true, but that when we're just serious about life or just consumed by it, and we don't find time every day to find something that we're joyful about or glad about or find delight in, we're really missing out on life's great invitation to us.
Got to stop and smell the roses along the way.
And all the time.
Yeah, and all the time. And if you don't see any roses, go dig around in the neighbor's bush.
Well, Royce, I tell a story in my book. I woke up one morning and it was, I was, living in Seattle, and for your listeners who've been in the Pacific Northwest, they'll know that for, a good 8 or 9 months of the year, you can expect a lot of gray and a lot of clouds and a lot of drizzle. And I woke up one morning and I just had this sort of torrent of negativity flow out of my mouth. Everything about the day was going to be bad. I just, I don't think I said one positive thing about the day. And it's not normally the way I am or the way I choose to live my life, but my spouse said to me, "Boy, are you going to live like this today, or are you going to choose to create a little sunshine?" And, I think that's part of how we, we also make choices about where we're going to discover gladness in the course of each day. Some of it's very much dependent upon how we choose to engage with ourselves and with life and the day.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. I mean, I can tell you, if I get up in the morning and I stump my toe, I go in there and shave and I nick myself. I come up front and the cat has pooped in my chair, and I spill my cereal on my lap. I get out on the highway and traffic is cutting me off every inch of the way, it seems like. I get to work, I tend to want to be cranky with everybody at work.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you do, Royce, when that happens?
Well, used to I'd get cranky. Then I realized somewhere down the road that, hey, when I did that, I really brought the same negativity back to myself.
Exactly. Yeah, it's sort of like we invite it back, and it attracts itself to us. It's amazing. I find that I when I am in a mood like that, and it doesn't happen often, but when it does, I tend to go out for a walk and just kind of the exercise and clearing my mind, and you can't help but notice some beautiful things around you when you take a walk, no matter what your neighborhood's like. And I find that always helps. But I also start each day, whether it's one of those kind of days or just a regular day for me, I started by actually thinking about and visualizing every person that I know I'm going to see or have an appointment with or a meeting with, and I invite myself just to be present to that person. So I'd be saying, "Gee, I'm going to see Royce today," and I have a picture of you in my mind, and
you still manage to eat after seeing that picture in your mind.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have a second cup of coffee, but that's not a bad thing. And And then, you know, when I actually get to spend time with you, I can say to myself, unless there's a real crisis going on, I can turn my cell phone off. I don't have to respond to any texts or emails for the next 20 minutes. And Royce and I are just going to really be together, and we're not going to have anyone interrupt that. And I tell you, that kind of simple practice every day changes the way I think about the day, the way I engage with people. And then I also think about the folks who, you know, I can't visualize them because I don't know who they are, but I know that in the course of every day I'm probably going to meet people who I didn't expect to meet, and it might be, you know, the parking attendant somewhere, or the clerk in the grocery store who's, you know, ringing my vegetables or my bread up or whatever it is I'm buying, and, you know, she might say something to me, and it's like, wow, I need to be present to whoever it is today, because I find that the most amazing conversations happen. I was in San Francisco this last weekend for some book events, and I was walking down a sidewalk, and suddenly, you know, this car came to a screeching halt at a stop sign, and the driver's door was flung open, and the driver jumped out of the car and ran around the front of it, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this some weirdo? Is something going to happen here? And I just kind of slowed down and was barely walking, keeping my bearings and looking at what was happening. Mm-hmm. And the next thing I knew, the driver of the car actually was helping a woman who was caught between a bicycle that was tied up to a pole, and on the other side of it was one of those huge, you know, wooden utility poles. And she was blind, and she had her cane with her, and she was trapped between the bike and the utility pole.
Ouch.
And he had actually spotted it. And he jumped out, and I just stood there because he was very gentle with her. I mean, here was this guy who was moving fast. He was aggressive, getting out of the car, pulling it to a stop, all of that. And he was really kind to this woman, and he helped her get on her way. And he said, "There's no more obstacles down the street here." And she was very grateful. And I actually ended up chatting to him, and I said, you know, that was an amazing thing you did. And he said, I learned living in a big city always to be on the lookout. And he said, I was taught to be on the lookout for bad stuff, and people who, you know, might be a little scary. But he said, I've also learned that I can be on the lookout for good stuff or people who need some help. And I thought, wow, that's a really beautiful approach to life, man. And I said to him, so do you do things like this often? And he said, I just like to be aware of my surroundings. And he said, you know, if I can do one nice thing in the course of a week for somebody, he said, that's a blessing to me. And I thought, wow, I just had this amazing gift in the middle of, you know, what some people think of as a big heartless city. And it was really quite beautiful.
Well, yeah, and I think it's nice to be able to do that. I mean, we used to know a homeless person that used to panhandle at the corner store a half a block from our house, and we'd make sure we always took him a supper plate because we knew he didn't eat good, and he lived in a closet-like storage room in the back of the store, and, well, you know, he definitely didn't have it as well as we did, and we couldn't help but feel sorry for him. But, you know, when you do that, you actually open up to somebody, and we actually got to know him pretty well, and we found out that there was, you know, quite a bit more to this man than what met the eye afterwards, in other words.
Yeah. But, you know, in your doing that, Royce, which is a beautiful thing that you and your family did, and on some level, you know, I often hear people say, and I talk about this in the book, oh, you know, what does it matter what I do? And, you know, my small actions don't make a difference. But I believe that every time we do something as seemingly simple as what you and your family did in taking this guy a plate of food regularly, that we actually, all of those good actions together help to make the world a better place. But I don't know if this was your experience, but it's certainly mine that when I do acts like that, I actually feel better about myself, and I feel better about life. But in your story, you actually are demonstrating what I talk about in the book, which is that when we start to get to know one another and we listen to our stories, we're often surprised. Here you were, the guy was just, a homeless guy. But as you got to know him, you realized that there was more to his story. And I think that's true for all of us.
Yeah, in fact, I found out that he had once had his own family and, held down a job and, was doing really well. And he had fallen on hard times, ended up divorced. People who are out there, facing this kind of life, a lot of them, they really were just like any other working Joe at one point in time or another. Some of them were even lawyers and doctors.
Absolutely. And I think it's just a reminder that, whatever our appearances are or the appearance of someone else, it never really tells us the truth of their story or the beautiful things that are in their lives, even when they're living with hardship.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this, Les. It's a little bit, way off topic, but are you speaking to me on a cell phone, a landline, or like a Skype phone, or?
No, it's a regular phone, but it's a satellite line.
No, what I mean, does it have a means of turning up the microphone?
Let me just, I'm going to take it away from my ear. So if you want to talk for a while, let me just have a look and see if I can see if there's something on it.
Okay, and while he's doing that, folks, I want to go ahead and mention once again that if y'all want to join us live, come to www.paranormalpalace.com, and we got a chat room here waiting for you. We're looking for more people to join in and keep the chat room live with the folks that we got going on now. You got a chance to ask questions in chat. Don't forget the call-in numbers, 832-632-7904. And don't forget, if you want to know more about Robert, you can go to www.robertvtaylor.com. And his book is also available at Amazon. And if you scroll down beneath my chat room and the phone number and the show description, at the bottom of his description, you will see a link there to Amazon. And if you're going to purchase the book, best way for me is if you click on this link to go there, because that way I get a commission off from it. But it is definitely not the only way to get the book. And tomorrow I will be putting this in my archives and, as usual, putting it on YouTube and other places. So this will be on the web for a long time to come for everybody to listen to. The only place I'm going to be able to put the whole entire description as well as the link to his book is on my site, of course, because other sites get a little funny if you try to promote or advertise on their sites. But at least I can get a show there, and they'll hear a little bit about the book on the actual show itself. So, Robert, did you manage to see if there was a microphone button or not?
Well, I can't find it on this phone, Royce, but does this help? I've got you on speakerphone, or does that just make things worse?
I'm pretty sure Les will let us know in a minute if that helps or not. He's just, it's really hot where he's at, and he's got a fan going that happens to be loud, and it's, coming up over its volume, and it's making it hard for him to hear you. He said he can hear me fine, but you know how, internet radio can be. You can always hear the host better than you can the guest, because I'm going straight from my house up online, and you're being brought in, second party, in other words.
Sure.
So that would account for that. So it always has to be a little louder for the guest than it does for the host. And I already cranked up the volume all the way in my broadcaster, and we don't usually have this problem, but hey, when you're dealing with technology, you never know when you're going to have a problem. You just work with it the best way you can.
Absolutely.
So getting back to the book, though, while I'm waiting on Les to let us know if that your speakerphone helped or not, I did quite a bit of reading in this book, and one of the things that I noticed is you have a bunch of people in here that was very, very willing to share their stories, which, if you ask me, is a very unusual thing. Most people don't feel comfortable sharing their stories. They worry what someone's going to think of them, is somebody going to make fun of them, are they going to end up alienating themselves? But you don't appear to have had that problem here. You must have some kind of a technique for getting to know people or something.
Well, Royce, I thank you. I tell the stories because in addition to telling some of my own story in the book, I just think that we connect through one another's stories, and many of the people whose stories I tell in the book are folks that I've really been privileged to get to know. Often they're people who've maybe heard me speak at a conference, or they've come to a workshop that I've done, or something like that, and we've emailed following that, and we've developed a friendship. And in some cases, I use people's real names, and in other cases, obviously somebody says, "Gee, you can tell my story, but don't call me Royce. Call me George or whatever."
Right.
And maybe don't give any distinguishing information about the city I live in, or my wife, or whatever it is. And so I always try to honor that, and I think people know that I would never break those kind of confidences or make that kind of revelation uncomfortable for them. So yeah, I feel very honored that people have allowed me to do that. But I hope that ultimately it's the those who read the book who will find in those stories those moments of saying, "Oh yeah, I've had an experience like that," and yeah, okay, I'm going to learn from what he did or she experienced. So they're really there as a gift to help us as we each try to make sense of what it means to be fully alive and fully human.
Right. And, one of the things that you were noting in your book that I picked up on about becoming fully human is that a certain part of it entails stepping out of your comfort zone. I mean, not everybody can do this, and we were just talking about some people that would, like, for example, would rather remain anonymous or not have details of the city put out. But if you can actually step out and say, yeah, this is who I am, even though it might alienate you or people make fun of you or may not like you because of it, it's like having a burden lifted off from you. You're not like under somebody's thumb, or I can't be me, in other words.
Exactly. Royce, I think you've just hit on something that's really critical in the book. I think that each one of us has incredible beauty and talent and magnificence about us, and that's meant to shine. And I think our experience is that we've all known, and maybe some of your listeners still live with people who they feel that they're obligated to be put down by, or who because they can really express themselves honestly or fully, keep a part of themselves locked up, and that's really no way to live. In fact, it's a way to hide from life, and I don't believe that we're meant to hide from our own life, because when we hide from who we are and what we're capable of, we actually hide from other people, because we're saying, I don't value myself enough for you to get to know me in the way that I really could be known. And that really diminishes not just yourself, but it diminishes both, the people around you. And so there are some tools and practices in the book for really letting go of and letting go of those things that keep you from being who you're meant to be. But there are also practices in the book and stories about people who've really had the courage to actually say, this is a scary place for me to be, but I actually need to deal with this fear or this nagging question that I've lived with for the last 20 years, because unless I do that, it's going to keep controlling my life.
I would tend to agree with you 100%. Now, I also meant to tell you that Les typed in the chat room that that does seem to be louder, and he thanked you for that.
Good, I'm pleased.
Getting over his fan for him there. Anybody else, if it's gotten too loud for you by accident, apologize for that. Just kind of turn your volume down and understand that, some people's computer volumes are lower than other people's anyway, so sometimes we just have to kind of everybody work together. To the best that we're able to anyway. But yeah, I was listening to what you were saying there, Robert, and yeah, I know for me personally, I wouldn't feel like my life was complete. I wouldn't feel like I was my own man if I had any part of me that I couldn't let another person know about it. It'd be like, for me, and maybe it's just me being silly, I feel like I'm being controlled by that person. I'm that person's slave. I have to, accommodate my lifestyle to suit them so that they will like me or whatever the reason might be. But while I'm doing that, am I really being me? Or am I being what they projected me that they wanted me to be?
Yeah, exactly. Then you're really just hiding from yourself, And I think, Royce, like you, we're not intended to live that way, and yet people often fall into that. And sometimes it's the people who are closest to us who keep us from being ourselves because we're fearful of offending them or upsetting some family dynamic or whatever the case is. And I'm not suggesting that we go out there and be kind of in your face offensive and nasty to people. That's not what I'm talking about. But the kind of stuff that I hear you saying, which is just claiming who you are and saying this is part of my truth. This is part of what makes me tick. It's what makes me alive, and really inviting other people to understand that and maybe even to experience that when they're able to see you as you are, not as they want you to be.
Yeah, and I would never want to be belligerent with somebody because then you're just really being an obnoxious troublemaker. There's no need to be that way with other people. And if people ain't being harsh and aggressive with you, there's no need to be harsh and aggressive with them either. I mean, ultimately, we're all one creation on one planet that should be striving for brotherhood, not war.
Absolutely. And that's and when we actually live a life that way, Royce, as you know, life is different, and life is experienced in a much more lively way.
Yeah, I think so too. I would really agree. At least that's been my experience. But again, everybody has their own individual experience. But what I have noticed reading your book and the stories that you tell time and time and time again, when people did come out and just say, hey, this is me. I don't mean to be offensive, but I have to be me as surely as you have to be you to live life and everybody be unique in the way they are and to be totally honest with you while you're being honest with me, that they usually ended up happier in the end than if they hadn't have done it.
Well, I would almost go so far as to guarantee to any of your listeners, Royce, that when they're able to do that, when they're able to live into their own beauty and magnificence and who they are, that their experience of life is nothing but better. And you start to then also appreciate other people in all of their beauty and what makes them unique. And that's where we start to discover the fact that, we actually need one another because we learn from each other. And we learn from those who we may be, particularly close to, but we also learn from those who we seem to have no apparent connection with. And those are all choices that we make, and the book offers very practical tools for how your listeners can actually live a life that is lived that way.
Right. And like you said, not everybody's going to do that, especially not right away, but I think like you said, when you do it yourself, you're really, like Jesus said, letting your light shine, and then other people can let their light shine a lot easier if they see you're able to do it. But then, too, some people take more time than others. But if my Uncle Raymond was to sum this up, he used to have a lot of sayings when I was growing up, like always leave a place cleaner than what you found it. And one of his other favorite sayings was always live and let live, which is basically what we were just talking about, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some of that, live and let live. I also think, though, that what I suggest in the book, Lois, is that we make choices to rather than just letting things happen randomly, that we actually make choices about how we want to engage with other people. We make choices about how we claim our own identity. Knowing that the holy and the sacred is revealed in us in an even more wonderful way when we do that.
Which is also probably one of the main purposes in the Bible for saying not to forsake the gathering of the flock, because it's when you're gathered together with the flock that everybody can really get together and socialize and communicate and, share everything and bring out everything that needs to be brought out. Whereas everybody just stayed at home, that would never happen.
Absolutely. Every time I particularly find this if there's, a time when it's like, I'm tired tonight. I don't really think I want to be at that gathering or that meeting. And then you find yourself, you go there and you think, boy, I would have missed this amazing experience or encounter with, such and such a person if I hadn't done that. And it's a reminder that, we're one family. And we need each other desperately.
Now, another thing that I've seen repeated in your book time and time again, which I think is a very strong truth for me, is about facing your fears and overcoming your fears. And this brings you to a whole entire new level of experiencing life without fear, or with at least one less fear for each one you overcome.
Yep, absolutely. And, we certainly each have fears that we live with in our lives. And the first step, I believe, is in being able to name and give voice to what those fears are. Because those fears are like a little demon dancing on our shoulder. They seem to know exactly what it is that triggers us to be afraid. And when you've got a fear, you live your life in a fearful way. And I don't believe that's any way for any of us to live. And some of those fears are, they might seem silly to other people. They might seem irrational. But if they're a fear that you have, they're real. And so there are tools in the book for how to actually name and not give those fears power. Because when we start to diminish their power, we find ourselves being able to go to the places where we take some new steps, maybe even some risks. And part of what, as you've discovered probably in the book, Royce, is that all of the pathways, the 7 pathways of the book, I don't believe that any of us arrive at one moment in time where we say, "Gosh, I've done all the work that needs to be done in my life," or I've got all the spiritual insight, or all of the love or compassion or kindness, all sort of scored away. I just don't think that happens for any of us. Our lives are a journey. We keep learning new things about ourselves, about the holy, about who we are, about other people. And so the book is really, it suggests that we be compassionate to ourselves. That, it's easy to get into a space of saying, "Oh, I wish I was more loving," or "I wish I could be more compassionate about, X group of people," or whatever the case might be. And then you get into a situation of just endlessly beating yourself up and saying, "Oh, I'm just kind of stuck here." Whereas when you can actually be compassionate about all of the complexity of your life and the fact that there are still things that you need and you want to learn, and the transformations that still are going to happen in your life, the book really is an invitation to say, it is one step at a time, one day at a time, and those choices can be made if I'm open to them.
Right, and that, makes a lot of sense. Now, I was going to say that your book was divided into the 7 different pathways, well, for the most part anyway, for becoming fully alive. And for each one of these chapters, you had a section of tools at the end of the chapter to help people out with each one of these. This is like a handbook. You could actually take one chapter at a time and practice one of them till you got really good and then move on to the next. And we've already talked somewhat about connecting stories. Now, Pathway 2, breaking through enclosures. Would you care to give somebody a little bit of a detailed description to some degree of that?
Yeah, I talk about enclosures as the self-fulfilling actions and beliefs that that keep you from being who you are meant to be. Often, unacceptable boundaries and expectations drawn by other people, perhaps even by religion or family or, the culture around us. Anything that encloses or defines a limited you. And I say that they're important because to step beyond the enclosures is important because when you live behind an enclosure of some kind, you actually developed a very sort of cramped heart, and your own voice becomes squelched, and you actually have a lack of compassion for yourself. And, each of the 7 pathways, I begin with telling a very personal story, and this pathway, Beyond Enclosures, I tell a story of being invited to go speak at a black church in South Africa when I was, 16 years old, and there I was, this white kid, realizing for the first time that I was a minority, and I was the only white person in the room, and I talk about the amazing response and friendships that emerged out of that experience. But if I hadn't actually accepted that invitation, I would have lived behind an enclosure that said, oh, you're really not going to get to know people who the government says are different from you. And I tell the story in the book in this pathway on breaking through enclosures of a woman who came to a week-long workshop with me, and we would begin every day with some meditation time. And on the very first day, she said, Robert, I'm probably not going to come to any more of these meditations. I'm not the kind of meditating type. I talk all day long. She said, the moment I get out of bed, she said, as my feet hit the ground running, my mouth just keeps moving all day long. I just talk and talk and talk, and I don't stop until my pillow's on my head. My head is on the pillow in the evening. And I said to her, well, you're free to make that choice, but it is part of the program, and if you can make it work, that'd be great. So on the second or the third day, we were passing around these glass meditation stones, and each one had a word inscribed or etched into it, and she pulled out of the sack, so she couldn't see what she was actually pulling out until she had it in her hand and looked at it, and it had the word written on it, still. And afterwards, she came up to me and she said, can you believe I selected this one, still? She said, I don't know how to be still. But there she was. For the rest of the week, she was the first person who would arrive in the morning for the meditation, always 10 or 15 minutes early. And on the very last day, she said to the entire group, she said, I have learned something. She said, I always told myself I couldn't meditate, I couldn't be quiet. But she said, what I've learned in these half-hour sessions every morning is I've learned to listen to my breath. And she said, when I listen to my breath, I become open to the holy. She said, I feel my body relaxing. She said, some of the stress that I came with and some physical pain has actually either disappeared or lessened. And she said, you could have knocked me over with a feather. She said, I would never have imagined myself doing this. So I tell that story because it was an enclosure for her. Someone had told her, or she had come to believe, that she couldn't be quiet, that she couldn't meditate, she couldn't take time out in that way every day. Now, we each have the personality we're born with and the DNA we're born with. She's always going to be someone who gets up in the morning and starts talking, and that's who she is. But she's also learned that there's something else that she's now no longer afraid of. And so that's an example of a very, practical enclosure, something that you just live with as an assumption about your life and who you are. But when you actually start to break through that enclosure, you discover some new gifts.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a good moral of this here is just because you have something that some may consider a negative, A, it may not really be a negative.
Exactly.
It just might be getting misused, and B, it can be redirected.
Absolutely.
Which almost anything in the form of energy can be restructured or redirected. And I might be using the wrong terminology. You might have some better terminology than what I'm using here, but I think you know what I meant by that.
No, I think you're absolutely on target, Royce. And I think part of that is, and I talk a lot about this in the book, about the kind of awareness that we choose to have about life. Because when we are aware of what's going on in our own life, and maybe we take some time to reflect, to meditate every day, or we make some other choices, we start to become aware of the energy, the life-giving and the life-draining energy that exists in us and around us. And I think one of the great gifts that science has been giving us over the last years is the truth that the universe itself has never stopped creating. It's not static, and it's ever expanding with new galaxies, new stars. And I believe that one of the gifts of that for us is that our lives are like that our lives never stop creating. There is always creative and creating energy within us. And even at the very last, when we are breathing our last breath, there is still something being created in us.
I never really thought about it at the last breath before, but then, too, who's to say what you hear is always going to be the actual case? A lot of things, I think, are assumed anyway.
Yep, yes.
Now, let's see, where were we at here a minute ago before I allowed myself to lose our place? Now, if we move on to Pathway 3, risky invitations. Now, I haven't read this book in a few days, but if memory serves me correctly, you tell a story about yourself in this risky invitations about being at a church and some homeless people wanting to, unless it's another chapter, use the parking lot at the church temporarily, and you thought there would be problems with it. Is that the same chapter?
No, that's actually, it's a different chapter. It's the pathway called Hairpin Curves of Life, which is Pathway 6. But you know what I love, Royce, is that you remembered that story. Yeah, I just started a job in Seattle back in 99, and just a few months later, in early 2000, I was leading this large public institution, or an institution with a very public presence, and there were all kinds of issues to be dealt with around money and fiscal misconduct and membership and so on. And there was this huge battle going on in Seattle between a homeless tent encampment and the city of Seattle, and the city wanted to just shut it down and move folks out of town. I mean, that was the bottom line. And so I'm in my office one day, and someone comes in and says, this tent city wants to know if you'll extend an invitation to have them on the grounds. And we were in a very prominent position overlooking the city of Seattle, and I'm thinking, this is the last thing that I want to have on my plate right now. I had done work in New York for 20-some years with the homeless, and so I knew the issues, and none of that bothered me, or none of that was new to me. And I thought, there's something here about hospitality and kindness that your tradition says you need to welcome and shelter the homeless and the hungry and the naked, and that seems like a no-brainer, but are you really ready for this, the publicity that's going to come out of it and the response from the city government? And I thought, well, this is a hairpin curve. This is just not, what I imagine doing. And I suggest in the book that hairpin curves are the events and the things that just throw your life off balance by interrupting your routine and your path, and they kind of shake us up and point us to unexpected invitations. But at the same time, I suggest that those hairpin curves, whatever they are that are thrown our way, also come with invitations that give us a new experience of life. And so as I thought about this request, I thought, okay, so a no-brainer to invite the homeless to be here for a month, which was all that the law would allow us to do. But what happens at the end of the month? They're still homeless, and there's still going to be the battle with the city. And I'd had enough of, decades of working on the issue to say, okay, but what if we issue another invitation and invite people from city government, from foundations, from the corporate sector, business leaders, people from the educational system, social services, and also the homeless and others, and invite them to come and be part of the conversation of thinking about actually ending homelessness or thinking of new ways of responding to it. And that's what we did. And it was remarkable in terms of all that flowed from that. So I use that as my introductory story and one of many stories that I tell in this pathway about the hairpin curves of life to say essentially never see something for what it seems to be on the surface. It might throw you off course, throw you off balance, but there's normally something else going on that you're being invited to respond to and to trust your imagination around.
That is definitely true. I can't tell you how many times in my life either me or a friend or a relative of mine has said, going into that, I dreaded it and I didn't want to do it, but now that it's over and done with, I sure am glad I did because I didn't know this was going to take place while I was doing it.
Exactly. There's power in that, Royce.
There's a lot of power in that. A lot of people just don't realize it. And some people, they do realize it, but they forget from one time to the next time, in other words.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and I do apologize for mixing up the location of that. I'm the
Not
kind
at all. I love that you remember the story.
I'm the kind of person that I could quote you verses from the Bible from front to back, but I'd be doggone if I couldn't tell you where I knew where they were at. I just knew what it said.
Yeah. Well, I love that. That's ultimately what matters. So you had said just before we started talking about that, Royce, that each of the pathways or the chapters of the book provides people with things to think about, and I, in fact, give at the end of each pathway 3 questions to reflect on. And then I also give 3 what I call spirited practices, things that people can use in their own spiritual life, maybe as part of a meditation practice or something. And so those are really sort of practical tools for people to use and to be able to return to time and time again. I'm also finding that as I travel the country talking about the book, that book groups around the country are actually using the book, and so they're finding that those questions and those spirited practices are a great way to engage in the themes of the book on what it means with other people. So I'm really thrilled about that, and we're on my website about a book discussion kit.
Well, now, I was also going to ask you further down the road, and I'm getting ahead of myself, since you mentioned about your website, do you have any events coming up that you wanted to, tell anybody?
Well, I am going to be in various parts of the country over the course of the year. I'm actually going to be in Phoenix, Arizona this week, and then I'm going to be in Chicago and Spokane, Washington. I've got something in Boston at the Boston Public Library in August. And then in September, I'm going to be spending about 10 days in North Carolina in Wilmington and Raleigh-Durham and Charlotte. And October, I'm going to be in Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. So, and, Cleveland in the fall. And the list just kind of keeps on. So if any of your listeners want to find out where I'm speaking, they can go to my website, which is robertvtaylor.com, and always put in the V. It's V for Vincent. Otherwise, it'll take you to someplace else. And just click on the speaking calendar, and it'll show you exactly where I'm speaking and the time, and if there's a registration, what to do about that. But most of them are just events that are open to the public.
Well, do you ever get around here to the Houston area?
Well, I was in Dallas a few months ago, and I had a great time, and I am dying to come to Houston. So if you have anyone who'd like to invite me to come and be there, I will be there.
Okay, well, I'll keep that there definitely in mind. And in all honesty, I have so much going on that I don't really get out of the house and do a lot out and away from the house. But I have thought before that it might be nice to have like a UFO sighting group, or to go with John, who's one of the listeners here, on some of his ghost hunts. I went with him once, and I had a fantastic time, except for the fact that I had just quit smoking, and my lungs weren't up to the trip, and my back wasn't up to it at the time. But it was, other than that, a fantastic trip. But I just don't really get out like I feel like I should.
Yeah. Well, if I get to Houston, I'd love to go on one of those outings with some of your listeners. Yeah. And if any of your listeners do show up at my events, please introduce yourselves. And I just love meeting people, and tell me that you heard about it and that you're there because of Royce's show.
And you're definitely a people person, and I take it from reading your book and from your teachings.
Well, I just, I find myself energized by people. I'm interested. I learn from other people, and I guess I'm very much a people person.
Well, yeah, I think that really more people really ought to be a people person. I mean, what really else do you have in life? I mean, sure, you got movies, you got video games and computers, but I mean, aside from technology, you either got animals that don't speak your language, insects that don't speak your language, or you got other humans that do. Wouldn't it make sense to interact more with the ones that do speak your language instead of just having a one-sided flow coming from the TV?
Well, Royce, I hope that your listeners, as they read A New Way to Be Human, that they will discover all kinds of ways to do exactly that, because I think it's in our connections and our time with one another as human beings that we discover wisdom and truth, and we find that life is not only interesting but engaging, and something that we wake up in the morning and want to be a part of. And I'm a great fan of technology, and I think we're living at an exciting moment in human history, because I think that technology can be a wonderful way to keep us connected with other people, whether it's through Skyping or tweeting or text or whatever it is, or other social media. But at the end of the day, there is nothing that, at least for me, that beats being face-to-face or in the same room with other human beings.
Exactly. That's where I was coming from on that. And I would agree with you with that 100%. Now, real quick, because we only really got to about the third pathway, would you like to kind of give everybody a briefing of the other pathways to kind of give them an idea? I mean, don't give the whole candy store away, but, kind of a summary of these here, and the, summary of maybe the tools and that you got in the back of the chapters to give them an idea of what they can look forward to in the book?
Yeah, I talk about the pathway 3 is about risky invitations, and and that's really essentially about the things that interrupt the course of our life and how we respond to them. And the stepping stones in that book are about knowing that you're really loved for your existence, and that trusting and cultivating your imagination is really important in terms of how you respond to those risky invitations. And then I talk in that pathway about how to polish the world, which is, how to be part of making the world a better place and changing it for the good for all people. And then pathway 4 is about being at home in your heart, and I talk about our heart as being a physical and emotional and intellectual and spiritual destination, and I talk about how we actually know what it is that anchors our heart and that heart space about our life. And so the stepping stones that I talk about in that book are being present to your own heart experiences and assuming that people are actually nice at the core of their being, and that we're invited to have people who are in a good heart space along our own journey. I also suggest in that pathway that, it's not all about you. It's not all about me, and that there is life discovered as we learn to be courageous, and then I talk about courage being really about self-love and love of other people, and I suggest in it that the holy, the sacred, is actually found and discovered in our hearts. And then in the fifth pathway, I talk about the thin places, which is a concept from both the Celtic and the Hindu traditions about the holy being found, in places between nature and water. And I suggest that the sacred, the thin places, are also found on the edges of our lives, those places that kind of scare us. And so I talk about tools for befriending our fears and creating a mindful way of being. I talk about discovering the disguises of the holy, that the holy is present in each one of us, and how to actually begin to recognize that. And then I talk about polishing the connection that we each have with the larger universe, and how we're surprised by love when we develop an open mindset. And then I think we spoke a little about the hairpin curves of life. And the seventh pathway is called Holy Surprises, which is really a pathway about how to develop a life that is about delight and joy and gladness. And then the book concludes with really offering people some next steps, and I just hope that your listeners will find that the book is a tool that they keep coming back to time and time again on this wonderful journey through what we call life. We get to go through it with each other, and I believe that we're blessed along the journey when we're open to it, and that when we're blessed, we become a blessing to others, and we then become about seeking our own well-being and the well-being of other people, and that's when we discover the real meaning of happiness in life. And I believe that we are created for a life of happiness.
Well, I was going to mention to all the listeners that after reading this book, I can tell you right now, this would make great material for you people that have workshops on spirituality, even on religion, Sunday school classes on it, other types of meditation meetings, anything that you could use useful tips and tools on regarding spirituality, and its application to life and how to get more out of life. This makes a great reference book. In fact, and I don't mean this to come out the wrong way, Robert, but it could really actually make a great textbooks like the ones you use in Sunday school or school to learn history or something else like that.
Well, thank you, Royce. I really appreciate that. That's a beautiful thing that you just said. I hope that your listeners will use the book widely and that groups will use it. And I also hope that people will give me feedback on my website, because I love to be engaged with people, and we try to respond to the things that people send us.
Once again, his website's at www.robertvtaylor.com, and I think, if I remember correctly, I've been posting this link in the chat room periodically. I know I usually post them, but I've been so interested in talking that I can't remember if I posted or not, but I'm pretty sure I did. I probably did it on automatic, if I know me.
And if any of your listeners want to connect with me, I'm on Facebook. It's Robert V. Taylor. And if they want to tweet, it's also Robert V. Taylor. So easy to remember. And I just want to say, Royce, this has been an incredible honor to be talking with you tonight. So thank you.
Oh, it's been an honor to talk to you. I thought we really had fantastic chemistry and karma going for us there. Wanted to ask you before you got away from me, before you slipped back into the water, so to speak. Do you have any new books coming out? Are you going to do a prequel to this book, or is that not a sequel, not a prequel?
Well, yeah, we're beginning to map out the next book, and I'll be spending some time this summer working on it, and so yes, very much so.
So I hope that when you come out with this next book, I'll hear from you and bring you back and let you tell my listeners about your new one. Can you give us a kind of a sneak preview without giving away the candy store again?
No, I can't do that just yet. I might be able to do that in a few months, but I would just be delighted to come back on your show again and talk with you, Royce, anytime.
All righty. Well, listen, we've been going at this one here for about an hour, and I think we covered the biggest majority of everything. Can you think of anything that we haven't thought to cover?
Well, I can't think of anything, Royce, except to say that I hope that the book is a blessing to your listeners, and I hope to hear from many of them, and I just hope that through it they discover not only the beauty of their own humanity, but that their own spiritual life, their own experience of life becomes more fully alive as a result of it.
And I'm quite sure that it will, especially if they take some of the tools and tips in the book and, try to apply it. And, I can tell most people that most things in my life, I found out that you usually don't get it down pat the first try. You have to keep dipping into it until you master it, so to speak.
Yep, isn't that the truth? Yeah.
And I also found what I always teach my kids, if you don't mind me throwing this in there, is it doesn't matter really what you're doing. As long as you don't give up, you've never lost or failed. You're still trying, you're still fighting, you're still going at it. But the only way you could possibly fail is to quit.
Yep, and never forget that you're loved. Because I think when we forget that we're loved, it's easier to give up.
And it's also a little harder to love others, I think. A lot
Absolutely.
of people, I think that, well, they have trouble getting along with other people, or people that seem to me like they have low self-esteem issues. They were, brought up being down as children, and they have a down outlook of themselves and a down outlook of everybody around them.
Yep, and I hope that for all of your readers, for those who have had those experiences and for those who haven't, that the book will be an invitation to really confront those things, to work through them, and to live into the new fullness of who they're meant to be.
Which leads me to one last thing that I just thought about while we were speaking that I didn't ask earlier. What would you say to somebody that comes to you and says, I'm trying to interact with a person or a group of people that no matter how friendly I am, no matter how much I share, no matter how much I try to be there for them, they're just belligerent, cranky, cantankerous people. What should I do? What would you say to these people?
Well, sometimes in life you can't just keep trying, and I would say all of that beautiful energy and spirit of yours, and all of that love and concern is wonderful. But sometimes you need to just step away and say, in the fullness of time, I will be able to connect with this person or this group of people in a way that I hope to. And maybe the moment is not now. And you have to offer it up to the universe and trust that at the right moment you will be able to all circle back together. Because that releases you to free your positive energy, your love, your concern, your compassion into the universe, and to have it received by those who are ready to receive it.
And I noticed what you said in that did not include anything about giving up or quitting. It just mentioned taking a strategic retreat for a little while.
Absolutely.
Which there's nothing wrong with a strategic retreat. In fact, even fighters will tell you sometimes if you take like a wrestler, they start getting beat the fool out of inside the ring. They'll take a dive outside the ring and take that strategic retreat to clear the cobwebs before they go back in and try again.
Absolutely, and I talk about it in the book as a way of just being mindful about life and being aware and being conscious of where you put your energy. Because it's very easy to keep your energy in that ring or going around like a goldfish in a bowl, circling and circling, and never being able to swim upstream or downstream.
Huh, that was an interesting perspective, but I think very enlightening. All righty then.
Well, thank you, Royce.
I want to definitely thank you, Robert. It's really been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And I've got your contact info, and I'll be sending you links to where I post this at my site as well as that other sites. And, I hope that you enjoy the archive version, shall we call it. And I would like to stay in touch with you.
Well, I would really like that too, Royce, and look forward to it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and you have a good night, John. Robert, I'm sorry to say John because I was reading what he said in the chat room. I apologize for that. You have a good night, Robert, and I'll talk to you later, and I'm going to let you go get you some rest in now and maybe read a book or whatever you want to do, get you some unwind time before you go to bed, and we'll be in touch later on.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Royce.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, everybody. Actually, I didn't have a button to push. My Skype was folded, so I don't know how that happened unless he accidentally pushed his. He was on a landline, so it might have been him, but whether it was him or me, and I didn't know I did it. Coming back to the business at hand, we've got a show tomorrow night. It's going to be Gordon Johnny Noto, and I know he wants to talk a little bit about Nibiru. He says that there's pictures he's got that shows Nibiru close to our sun. I've seen these pictures, and to be honest, they're pretty small to be able to make it out. Of course, we know our sun's a lot bigger than a lot of planets, and by the time you look at something in a picture, it's hard to make out, but I'm sure he has more experience with that than I do. Also, Wednesday night, June the 6th, I'm going to have Tommy Hawksblood back, and we're going to be talking about spirituality. So I've got 2 more shows this week. And then I have another one Saturday, which is my usual show. And I think I also have another Wednesday show next week on the 12th. So I'm going to have more shows. And yes, I do. Actually on the 13th. So I'm going to have a show tomorrow the 5th, which is my usual show. Wednesday the 6th, which ain't. Saturday the 9th, which is. And then Tuesday the 12th, which is. And Wednesday the 13th, that ain't. So next several days are going to be kind of busy. Pardon me. I kind of took a little bit of a sip of water the wrong way. Want to remind everybody also that World UFO Day is coming up July the 2nd. You might want to click in that link on the upper right-hand corner and go check them out about that. And also, if you click on my friends link in the menu on the left, there's some social networks that I'm a member of, and there's a forum that I'm a member of. They're all linked on the page here. Alien and UFO Community is a Ning social network. Supernatural UFO is a UFO forum. And United Paranormal International is a Ning social network. They're all great places. I have a lot of friends at each one of them, and they're just wonderful people to know. And it's a great place to learn. I really encourage people to go over there and check them out and maybe join up. Their membership is free. And, like I say, you get to meet new people, and they got chat rooms. At least the, Nings have chat rooms. I don't know about well, actually, it's got like a shout, Supernatural UFO has like a shout box type of chat room in it. Also, if you click on the radio, link, radio favorites, I got 4 banners there for radio show hosts I know, like UKPN Radio with Gary Brown, JimHarold.com, The Gralian Report with Michael Hanks, Ohio Exopolitics Radio. And I want to apologize for Ohio Exopolitics Radio. I was mixed up. I've been saying his name is Mark Hamill, and I found out recently it was Mark Snyder. So I've been giving y'all the wrong name. The correct name is Mark Snyder. I hope to see you guys here. I want to thank y'all for coming. Again, I could not have a show without you folks. Got to have listeners as well as a guest if you want to have a interactive show, which is what I like to have. Please invite your friends to join us. Tell everybody about my show, especially if there's guests you think are going to be great guests. That's usually a good calling card. Let people know we have a chat room over here. Invite them to join us in chat. Let them know the membership is free. And we'll see if we can get some people coming into this chat room like I used to have at Blog Talk. And you, John, I know you remember those days. You used to come over there. I'd like to see the same thing over here, if I can anyway. And until the next time, guys, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I look forward to tomorrow night And once again, that's going to be, remind myself here, Gordon Johnny Noto. And he's a favorite in a lot of the Yahoo groups. John, you may have seen him in them. Les, I could probably invite him to your New American Democrats. I don't know if he'd want to be in a political group or not, but I can ask him. And in the meantime, I'll see you guys later, and I'm going to go join with my wife. Y'all have a good night. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is Robert Taylor, and his website is at www.robertvtaylor.com. And we're going to be discussing his book, A New Way to Be Human, 7 Spiritual Pathways to Becoming Fully Alive, that he's recently come out with. He's been doing spiritual work for decades now, and he's a much sought-after spiritual leader and a public speaker who invests his life in helping individuals and organizations realize their full human potential and impact in the world. And he's done a lot of work in this area, so I'm really thinking his book's going to be, well, actually, I read his book. It was really interesting, and I'm thinking that he's going to be a very interesting guest tonight as we talk to him about what got him interested in this and, how he, learned some of the information that he learned and where he's going with his book, etc. Now, for those of you that aren't listening right at my website or listening at YouTube or somewhere else like Shoutcast, if you want to call in, the number is 832-632-7904. If you want to attend these shows live and join everybody in chat and discuss with them, the website is www.paranormalpalace.com. Please come on over. We'll be more than pleased to have you. Always looking for more people in the chat room to, talk and keep the chat room going lively. And also people can ask the questions in chat if they don't like to call in. So, why don't we go ahead and get the show started and get Robert on here. Robert, how you doing tonight? I want to thank you for coming on the air with me.
I'm doing great, Royce. It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I think it's going to be wonderful that you come on with me. I mean, I've been looking forward to this here for some time. I know you and me had a couple cross paths there with life being what life usually is, and well, how life is, you just keep on stroking until you get it the way you want it.
Well, exactly, and here we are. So I'm glad to be with you. The clothes they wear, or whatever it is, and you start to actually listen to people and do that with paying some attention, and you find that if you actually know and you're comfortable with your own story and you're able to share it, that as you start talking, and you might do that at work or someone who's part of a sports club that you go to or whatever it is, and you start to realize that there's common ground, and that the differences that you might have been led to have believed in are really not that great. But at the end of the day, we're all seeking happiness. We're looking to find our place in the world, how to make a difference. And when we start to connect with other people, we're really enriched by that experience, and we become more engaged. The world becomes a more interesting place. Life becomes enlivened and alive in some new ways.
Yeah, it's been my finding, too, that if you can... Okay, now, Les was just saying in the chat room that the guest volume's a little low for him, that he has a noisy fan in the background, so he's having a little trouble hearing with his fan going. I'm going to see if I can raise the volume in the broadcaster form here a little bit and hope that does the trick.
Great.
I put it up all the way. I hope it don't bust anybody's eardrum. If this is too loud for anybody, turn your volume down, and we'll see how that works out. And Les, let me know if that fixed it for you after Robert speaks again, and then you can hear him and see if you can hear him any better. So, Robert, I understand that you were part of the segregation in Africa when you were younger. Do you think that had any influence on where you went later in life with spirituality?
Oh, I think it had a huge difference, Royce, and I tell a few stories about that in the book by way of really inviting the reader to think of their own experiences and what's formed and shaped them, because there are great learnings in it. I discovered some of the realities of, the old apartheid system in South Africa when I was a teenager back in the 70s. And, the whole system was designed so that people of the 4 different racial groups that were classified by the government would ridicule.
Now, just to break the ice, why don't you tell everybody what kind of got you started into the area of being spiritual study? You're a priest of the Episcopalian Church, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. And, even in that work, Royce, I found myself doing a great focus of my work over the decades has been working in the larger community on all kinds of social and interspiritual issues. And over the course of that time, I found myself doing more and more into spiritual work and learning from the practices of my Jewish and Buddhist and Hindu friends and others, and certainly from those who say, gee, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So it's been a great journey, and I think one of the things that I've really learned within it all is, while I'm very clearly grounded in my tradition, I believe that the sacred is present in each and every human being. And that when we begin to open ourselves, our eyes and our hearts to that, our own practices and our own traditions, whatever they are, get enriched and enlarged and expanded, and we realize that there is wisdom and eternal truth found in every human being when we're able to connect on that spiritual level with one another.
Yeah, that was a recurring theme that I kept noticing in your book, that the more you actually socialize with people, the more you get to know people, the people that are pleasant, the people that are not pleasant. It all comes around to the same thing. In the process of getting to know, you get closer to what's holy in life.
Absolutely. And, I think it's sort of a natural sort of default position for many of us to just sort of hang out with the people we know best. And there's a good reason for that. We're comfortable with them. They know us. We know them. We can probably finish each other's sentences or know what kind of jokes they're going to tell. And there's something wonderful about that. But there's also something really remarkable when we start to listen to the stories of people we don't know well, or perhaps even people who we've been told or were raised with. Our grandma might have said, boy, they're a little weird, or, I don't quite understand the very
best, in other words. And for many years there, it would have been hard for me to look past that into the good. And it was that way really until I got out of it for a few years. So, yeah, I can kind of see how that can happen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, I think, Royce, it's also, what you've just said is really important, because I think that sometimes the work that we're in, or perhaps even, our families or whatever, expose us just to the more shadowy side of life and people who really not on the up and up. And yet, the question then becomes, as you discovered, so how do I put myself in situations where I'm experiencing something else about life?
Well, and, I think for each person, Robert, that's probably, at least seems to me, and you know more about this than I do, would probably be different. I can tell you in my case it made a big difference when I moved into the neighborhood where these same people lived there for about 3 years and actually became good friends with them over a period of time. But I'm pretty sure for each person it's probably pretty different, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, I do think, Royce, it is also about the way in which we choose to live each day. If I make choices that the world is just a really a gloomy place, and there's plenty of bad news out there in the world. We just need to open the newspaper or turn on TV or listen to the radio to hear it. it's easy to become sort of overwhelmed. But I think that there's something within each of us that our DNA is wired for goodness and for compassion, and that when we start to make choices to say, how do I want to approach each day? Am I going to see the negative, or am I going to acknowledge that the negative is there, but actually make choices to be with people who have life-giving energy and who are alive with life. I provide some tools in the book to readers about the situations that are toxic. We've all been around in perhaps friendships or relationships with people who never know one another as human beings, and that they would have limited contact. And I started to actually get to know and to meet Black South Africans, and I was this white teenage kid, and I was astounded by what I saw. I mean, I was horrified by the violence and the injustice of the system. But I think what really turned my heart and really sort of pointed my life in a certain direction was that my new friends were people who would always say, violence is not the way to change this. There's another way. We don't want to become like the people who are being violent towards us. And I thought, boy, is that kind of a wimpy approach, or is there something more at work here? And I discovered that that these were folks who refused to be told that they were not important, that their lives were insignificant, and their spirit was remarkable. And I think one of the lessons that I took away from that I've cherished for all of these decades is that no matter how people try to enclose us and wall us off from others, that we each have the power to make choices, and that's what my new friends were doing. They were saying, you can try to demean or diminish me or to write me off, but you know what? I am someone who reflects something of the sacred and the holy, and so you can't really do that. And there was laughter, there was gladness in their lives, and it was really remarkable to me. And so I think that those images have been very much a part of the journey that I've taken, and it's part of what the book, A New Way to Be Human, invites the reader into. The things that enclose us from ourselves, that keep us from our own magnificence, but also looking out for and looking beyond and stepping beyond those things that keep us from the magnificence of other people.
Right. And, sometimes it is very hard. I've found, well, me especially, I did collections for, 15 years for TV rental, and people would rent merchandise and move off. They would claim it was stolen when it wasn't. And, well, you didn't always get to see people at their very